By the time a medieval archer reached adulthood, his body was already breaking. Imagine a young boy barely taller than his father's thigh, straining against a wooden bow. Then picture a warped silhouette of a human skeleton, bones telling a story of constant stress, see fingers gripping tightly, calloused and thick, before arrows scream through the air in battle, culminating in an exhausted face staring into a vast empty distance. This is the life of a medieval archer, from childhood to the grave. The Middle Ages were a time of harsh realities, where survival was a daily struggle, yet few lives were as singularly defined by physical and psychological agony as that of the medieval archer. This isn't just about men who fought in battles, it's about boys, then men, who were systematically reshaped, body and mind, into living weapons. We're going to trace their journey from the moment they first felt the pull of a bowstring to their often premature end, exposing the true human cost of being an archer in a brutal world. Before they were soldiers, they were already being shaped into weapons. The journey of a medieval archer began not in adulthood, but in the tender years of childhood, often as young as 7. While other children learned trades or played games, these boys were initiated into a rigorous regimen that would dictate the very structure of their bones and muscles. In regions like England, archery practice wasn't just encouraged, it was mandatory. Laws were put in place, like the Assize of Arms, demanding that all free men maintain their bows and practice regularly. This wasn't some gentle hobby. It was a state-mandated program of physical re-engineering. Imagine the pressure on these young boys, knowing that their community, their family, and eventually their king, depended on their ability to draw a bow. They didn't just pick up a stick and pretend. They were given small, manageable bows at first, but the progression was relentless. As they grew, so did the weight and tension of their bows. Each year, the draw weight increased, pushing their young bodies to adapt, to strain, to grow in very specific, often unnatural ways. This early, relentless training was the crucible where the archer was forged, laying the groundwork for a lifetime of immense physical strain. They were being molded, not just taught, ensuring that by the time they reached fighting age, the bow was less a tool and more an extension of their very being. Years of pulling the bow didn't just build strength, it reshaped the body. The medieval longbow was no child's toy. These were powerful instruments, often requiring a draw weight of 80 to 120 pounds, some even heavier. To repeatedly draw such a bow from childhood into adulthood created profound and permanent changes in an archer's physique. The constant asymmetrical stress of drawing a bow, always on the same side of the body, led to severe muscle imbalances. The dominant shoulder, arm, and back muscles became hugely overdeveloped compared to the non-drawing side. This wasn't just about big muscles. It twisted and contorted the archer's skeletal structure. Think about the chronic strain on the shoulder joint, the elbow, and the wrist. These joints were constantly pushed to their limits day in and day out, year after year. Modern archaeological evidence studying the skeletal remains of medieval archers paints a vivid and almost terrifying picture. Their bones often show severe deformations, enlarged muscle attachments on one side, compressed vertebrae, spinal curvature, and even bone spurs where tendons and ligaments had repeatedly pulled against the bone. Some archers displayed scapulae, or shoulder blades, that were larger and significantly thicker on their dominant side, almost like their bodies were attempting to reinforce themselves against the constant physical assault. Their upper bodies developed an almost lopsided appearance, a permanent testament to their chosen profession. This wasn't just an occupational hazard, it was an occupational transformation, literally altering the very framework of their existence. Every pull of the bowstring was a tiny hammer blow, slowly but surely reshaping their entire being. Pain wasn't temporary, it became normal. The life of a medieval archer wasn't just about training in war. It was an endless cycle of practice, maintenance, and repetition, all while battling a constant, gnawing pain. Their days were filled with the meticulous care of their weapons, ensuring their bows were strung correctly, their arrows fletched perfectly, and their bowstrings waxed and ready, but the bulk of their time was spent in continuous monotonous practice. Imagine standing for hours, repeatedly going through the exact same motion, nocking an arrow, raising the bow, drawing the string back to the ear, holding, aiming, releasing, over and over. Each draw was an act of extreme physical exertion. It wasn't just the large muscle groups. The small, intricate muscles of the hand, wrist, and forearm were also under immense strain. The fingers that gripped the bowstring often became gnarled and arthritic. The constant vibration of the bow, the shock of release, all contributed to persistent aches and pains. This was a life with little to no concept of modern recovery. No ice baths, no physiotherapists, no rest days for muscle repair. Archers were expected to train and perform, often with insufficient nutrition and sleep. Their bodies were in a perpetual state of stress and inflammation. The pain in their shoulders, their aching backs, the burning sensation in their drawing arm, and the throbbing in their calloused fingers, these weren't just passing discomforts. They were constant companions, a dull throb that became so familiar, it simply blended into the background of their existence. It was the background music to their lives, a never-ending symphony of strain. Before a single arrow could be loosed in anger, the archer had to endure another grueling trial, the march to war. This wasn't a leisurely stroll, it was a forced march, often spanning hundreds of miles, through all kinds of weather and terrain. And archers, unlike some other foot soldiers, carried a significant amount of specialized gear. Each archer typically carried his longbow, sometimes a spare string, and a quiver full of arrows, often 24 or more. These arrows weren't light. A full quiver could add substantial weight. Then there was their personal gear, armor, which might be a padded gambeson or a light brigandine, a sword or dagger for close combat, a shield if assigned one, and whatever rations they could carry. Imagine marching for days, sometimes weeks, with perhaps 40 to 60 pounds of equipment strapped to your already overworked and unbalanced body. Every step was an effort, every hill climb, every river crossing, every night spent sleeping rough in the elements, chipped away at their energy reserves. They arrived at the battlefield not fresh and ready, but already deeply fatigued, their muscles screaming, their minds dulled by exhaustion. The battle, when it finally began, often found them already fighting a war within themselves, against their own weary bodies. The fight hadn't even begun, but the archer was already paying a heavy price, depleted and vulnerable before facing the enemy. You weren't just shooting, you were hoping you wouldn't be the next target. When the trumpets blared and the enemy advanced, the archer's world transformed into a maelstrom of chaos, noise, and raw fear. Their role was simple, yet utterly brutal. Unleash a torrent of arrows upon the approaching foe, breaking their formations, killing their leaders, and demoralizing their ranks. This meant firing hundreds of arrows, often as quickly as humanly possible, over and over again. Consider the famous battles like Agincourt or Crécy, where English longbowmen fired volleys so dense it was said they darkened the sky. This wasn't a few shots, it was a sustained, high-intensity effort. Imagine the physical toll of drawing an 80-pound bow every few seconds, for perhaps an hour or more. The archer's muscles would burn, their lungs would ache, and their vision might blur from the sheer exhaustion, and all the while, they were utterly exposed. Unlike knights in heavy armor or infantry behind shields, archers often stood in open ground, frequently on flanks or slightly ahead of the main line, making them prime targets for enemy archers, crossbowmen, and cavalry charges. The very act of drawing and aiming a longbow made them vulnerable. They couldn't hide behind a shield easily while shooting, meaning every incoming arrow, every stone from a sling, every bolt from a crossbow was a direct threat. The air would be thick with the screams of the dying, the clang of steel, and the terrifying thud of incoming projectiles. The archer wasn't just an instrument of death, he was a target, a vulnerable link in the chain, constantly aware that his next draw could be his last. The terror wasn't just about dealing death, it was about avoiding it, minute by agonizing minute. Even if you lived, you were rarely the same. Battle was a lottery of pain and death. For an archer, survival was often a qualified victory, trading one form of suffering for another. Arrow wounds were common, and in a time before modern medicine, even a seemingly minor wound could be a death sentence. An arrow shaft penetrating flesh would bring with it dirt, cloth, and bacteria, leading to raging infections that swiftly turned gangrenous. If the wound didn't kill you outright, the infection often would, or at best, leave you with a limb that was useless, or worse, needing amputation without anesthetic. Beyond arrow wounds, archers faced broken bones from falls, impacts, or even the sheer force of battle. Close combat, though not their primary role, was unavoidable once lines collapsed or cavalry broke through. A sword cut, a club to the head, a spear thrust, these were all possibilities. Without proper medical care, a broken leg might never heal straight, a dislocated shoulder might never regain full mobility. What passed for medicine was often rudimentary, involving herbal poultices, basic sutures, and prayer. Many who survived the immediate aftermath of a battle were left permanently damaged, limping, scarred, missing fingers, or with chronic pain that would plague them for the rest of their shortened lives. Their bodies, already warped by years of training, now bore the fresh scars and permanent injuries of war, a constant physical reminder of the hell they had endured. The battle didn't always end when it was over. While the physical scars were obvious, the psychological toll on a medieval archer was often just as profound, though largely unacknowledged in their time. Imagine living with constant fear, the knowledge that any day could be your last, and the repeated exposure to horrific violence. Archers were literally purveyors of death, witnessing countless men fall by their hand or by the hands of their comrades. The sounds of battle, the screams, the roars, the thud of arrows would echo in their minds long after the fighting ceased. The sight of dismembered bodies, the smell of blood and fear, the chilling silence that fell after the carnage, these experiences would sear themselves into the archer's memory. Modern understanding of trauma like PTSD helps us recognize the lasting impact such events would have. For a medieval archer, there was no therapy, no counseling. They were expected to simply endure, to bury their anxieties and fears deep down, but these experiences wouldn't just disappear. They would manifest as nightmares, anxiety, a heightened sense of vigilance, or perhaps a numbing detachment. The constant stress of anticipating the next conflict, the lingering guilt, the horror of what they had seen and done, would wear away at their minds, leaving invisible wounds that were often as debilitating as any physical injury. They carried the battlefield within them, long after they had left it behind. For a medieval archer, the cost of survival was paid long before death, after a life defined by physical agony, constant danger, and psychological torment. The archer's end often came prematurely. Their bodies, already broken and twisted by years of drawing heavy bows, exacerbated by the injuries of war, simply couldn't endure as long as those who lived less demanding lives. Arthritis, chronic pain, and unresolved injuries would cripple them, making daily life a misery. Their shortened lifespans were a quiet testament to the immense physical and mental burdens they carried. They were the unsung heroes and the forgotten victims of medieval warfare, their unique sacrifices rarely recorded in the grand chronicles of kings and battles. Their bodies told a story of hardship, of constant struggle, of a life spent in service, literally giving their flesh and bone to the cause. They were shaped by the bow, lived by the arrow, and ultimately broken by the very profession that defined them. Subscribe to Foxhole History.